Howie Bentley here. Welcome to episode number 15 of Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Today, my co-host Matthew Knight and I will be discussing the Elak of Atlantis tale Dragon Moon by Henry Kuttner. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave your comments. On to the discussion. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, Howie. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So today we're going to be discussing Dragon Moon by Henry Kuttner. Now, after Robert E. Howard committed suicide in 1936, it left sort of a hole in Weird Tales magazine that needed to be filled because a lot of the readers really liked the sword and sorcery of Howard. And there were a couple of guys who were submitting stories or sending stories to Farnsworth Wright. One of those was Henry Kuttner. The other guy was Clifford Ball. But Henry Kuttner only wrote 6 sword and sorcery stories. Now, he was a fairly well-known science fiction writer back in the day and wrote some weird stuff and some horror too. But he had only written 6 sword and sorcery tales. 4 of those were about Elak of Atlantis. And those were, of course, the first one to be published in Weird Tales magazine was Thunder in the Dawn in 1938, and that was followed by The Spawn of Dagon in 1938, and then Beyond the Phoenix in 1938. And then there was a gap there for a couple of years, and then the Dragon Moon, the story we're discussing today, appeared in 1941, and it was the last sword and sorcery tale that Kuttner wrote. Of course, he did write a couple others about another character named Prince Raynor the Damned, and those were Cursed Be the City and the Citadel of Darkness in 1939 in Weird Tales. So what we're discussing today is the last sword and sorcery tale that Henry Kuttner wrote, which is Dragon Moon. It was published in 1941 in Weird Tales magazine. Now, this story is 13,120 words, and for a story that short, there are certainly a lot of characters in the story. For that reason, I've had to make notes just to keep up with the characters' names. There are so many characters, and these aren't just minor characters, or at least the way they figure in the as the story is being told within the story. So it's pretty important. So I made a note of those. But this story starts off with Elak, and Elak, I would say one of the things that's different between the Elak stories and the Conan stories is the Elak stories have a bit more humor to them in some ways, like Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories. Of course, there's a sidekick with Elak, and that's where the humor, the comedy comes from. And his name is Lycon, and Lycon's just this fat little dude that follows him around and stays drunk all the time. But when it comes down to a sword fight, the guy's very handy to have. He's very good. So anyway, Elak and Lycon are in a bar, in a tavern, drinking, and Elak and a ship captain named Drezar are in an argument over a tavern whore. And Kuttner comments that Elak probably would have just dropped it and let Drezar have her, but he was far too insulting to Elak. So everybody knows what's coming. A sword fight breaks out a fight breaks out in the tavern between the two of them, and for I think Elak slips and hits his head on a table or a bench and knocks him out. And before Lycon can stop Drezar from driving his sword into Elak, or he's trying to, but he knows he's not going to get there in time. But this, I won't say a fireball, but this fire comes licking out into the tavern and scares Drezar off. And Elak regains consciousness, and the druid, then his name is Dallon, appears there, and the druid has some serious business he needs to discuss with Elak. apparently Elak was a prince at one time, and he left the throne behind. He was the one who was supposed to inherit the throne from his father for his kingdom, and his kingdom is called Cyrena. And so the druid is trying to get him to come back and sit the dragon throne of Cyrena. And Elak doesn't want to do it. And he says, well, my brother, Orander, is king, and he's not going to, take the throne away from him. But he informs him that his brother is dead by his own hand, because he became possessed with this cosmic horror. Here, the cosmic horror element enters, and the name of this cosmic horror is Karkora, the pallid one. And so Orander, that was his name, right? I had to write all these names down. There are so many of them that are important to the narrative here. I don't think I've ever seen a story this short at 13,120 words that has this many characters that are necessary to the story. But anyway, so Orander becomes possessed by this Karkora and commits suicide. And the Karkora then takes possession of Sefer in a neighboring kingdom, which is Kiriath. And Sefer plans to invade Cyrena with a large army because he's possessed by this cosmic horror. We don't know what it is exactly. It's not really, the people in the story don't know what it is. Karkora, the pallid one. So, the throne is vacant. Dallin wants Elak to come back and claim the throne he renounced years ago. So from that point, he goes back to the throne, and they're arguing over the throne, whether he should ascend to the throne or not. And Dallin just has him sit on the throne, because this dragon throne is this mystical sort of object that if anyone is false, is not the real king, they'll be engulfed by flames. They'll be consumed by flames. And one person's already tried it. That's another. I didn't write that character's name down. He just was on the throne and poof. And he wasn't there long enough to be considered a character necessary to the story. But anyway, so Elak does get on the throne, and the fire surrounds the throne, but does not devour him. So from then on, he's already gone too. He had to go meet Mayana. Mayana is the daughter of Poseidon, and she was in love with this Sefer. I think his name was the other king who's planning on invading Cyrene. He was married to Mayana, and she left when he became possessed with Karkora. And the thing with Karkora is that was Mayana's son, who was born. They couldn't conceive, and she went to this wizard. Here's another name I have to look at. Eraikion, I think is his name. Eraikion, the sorcerer. And she mentions she could not conceive, so she goes to Eraikion, the sorcerer, who is dabbling in all sorts of unsavory magics, and be in contact with these cosmic horrors and all these strange things. And she comments that she was in a number of strange temples before dreadful altars. So that we're already smacking a Lovecraft here, which was very much, I believe, an influence on Kuttner. Certainly was on his wife, C.L. Moore. But so this baby, she finally conceives the baby, but the baby is deformed in such a way that she won't describe it. It leaves it to the imagination. And so what he does, he closes all the baby's senses as well. Eraikion does, this malefic sorcerer. and the child develops a sixth sense and comes into contact with Karkora, the pallid one, which is this cosmic horror that I mentioned. And so the baby is Karkora. So from there, Elak has to go fight. He has to go kill Sephir, one who is possessed by Karkora, and then Karkora tries to take him over. And it's just a really cool ending. And anybody who's listened to our song, Dragon Throne, on Legacy of Atlantean Kings, they know the ending of this story already, how it ends up. But I'm going to try to refrain from it if I can and not mention it, because that's a big time spoiler. That was a really cool twist at the end of this story. But anyway, since I pretty much told the whole story, any comments on that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a really fun tale and very fast paced. You know, I know Kuttner was trying to kind of fill the gap of Howard by, doing these sword and sorcery tales, but he really had his own way of doing it. It wasn't, these don't read like Howard tales. The ideas are similar. To me, they're more fast paced, and he writes almost like a science fiction writer or a Sword and Planet author. I mean, these have, to me, they have more energy of like John Carter or something like that, or like Sojin, like we were talking about. Very fast paced, action packed, like you say, a lot of characters, and a lot of this kind of spontaneous actions going on, where the hero is like real quick to just suddenly be fighting and whatnot. So that is a difference, and you find that in some guys' works, but there's like this kind of more dark, savage energy that is in Howard's works that in Henry Kuttner's we find, even though you have the weirdness and all the sword fighting and everything, it has a different flavor, I think. One thing that to me is interesting is his tone, and there's a change of tone in his writing that happens halfway through the story. And a lot of people have speculated whether, because C.L. Moore and Kuttner collaborated a lot, but there's a lot of works that are attributed to one author or the other, where people have speculated whether or not the other had a hand in it. Like I've mentioned, this story reads pretty fast paced and a lot of action, and like you said, some humor and all that, but there's a definitive change in tone when Elak gets to the lair of Mayana, where he has to like go into this eerie subterranean lake. And when he gets into it, when he enters this lake, there are these shadow beings that are kind of all around him, and he sees below him this like Atlantean metropolis, and it's this really weird scene. The tone and the prose suddenly gets very dreamy and ethereal, and has like this kind of this graceful elegance about it that I attribute to C.L. Moore's writing. And I wonder if that specific part, maybe she had a hand in, and we don't know, or maybe he was just influenced to write like that. I don't know, but to me it's definitely a change, and that part goes on for like 2 or 3 pages, and that's exactly how C.L. Moore wrote in her Jarrell tales, like the pages of weird descriptions and atmosphere, whereas the rest of this Elak stuff, there's not much of that. So that's something I picked up on too, that is different.
It might have been that I don't know if they were married by then or even corresponding. Now, like I said, Dragon Moon was the last Elak story he had written in 1941, so they very well might have been together by then. And they did. It's been remarked that he would sit and write, and then if he had to get up and go to the bathroom, she would sit down and continue right where he left off. So they were constantly writing because that's what they did for a living.
Right.
And they were a team, and they just pretty much just carried it in shifts almost. But so it might have very well been by then that she was writing some of it, or maybe by then at the least he had read so much of her stuff that he was writing like that too. I don't know if it was a collaboration or that. I mean, I guess I mentioned before about how he had written to her initially and thought that she was a man before he got to know her. But I don't know if that was before or after this tale. But yeah, that's an interesting speculation there.
Yeah, I don't know. I also was thinking of the Howard similarities, and you have in this story as well the things we've been talking about in the last few videos. The dream thing. There, he gets these visions and dreams. It's different because it's not like the dream magic thing we had happening with a sorcerer initiating this kind of. But when he first is told of Kokora, the pallid one, he kind of thinks it's a far out idea, and he's like, no, I don't care what you say, I'm not taking the throne, leave me alone. But then he falls asleep and has like this vision in a dream, and he wakes up and he's like, okay, I've seen this Kokora, which again, it's not defined exactly what it is, but he's like really affected by it. This makes him want to agree to try to do what he needs to do to counteract this force by inheriting the dragon throne. So yeah, that's another element. And you also have, we talked about in Worms of the Earth, this concept of the hero having to sleep with this unhuman woman. And Mayana, they describe her as not being human. There's a cool character he runs into, and again, I can't remember the names either, but that guy in the woods who's kind of like guides him to the lair of Mayana. He explains to him that she's not human, she's of this ancient sea race. So again, when she promises to help him by doing what she does, which we're not going to give away, she says, if you stay here with me, for one night, you spend the night with me, the same kind of thing. So again, we talked about that in Worms of the Earth and some other ones. It's another theme. So that might have been something that they all were playing with, here and there, or it could have been a direct, influence. Maybe he, thought of Worms of the Earth or something like that when he incorporated that.
Now, there is another character in here who's kind of interesting. He's kind of brief, but an interesting character, and his name is Inger of Amanalk. And Amanalk is basically Ireland or Scotland. I mean, they're Celts. They're modeled on the Celts, this race of people are. But there's a really cool thing where they're in the battle, in that final battle, and he's killed in the battle. But then his men put him up on their shields. They make like a shield, pallet with shields above their head, and he still leads into battle. He's dead, but they're carrying him on these shields and go charging into battle. So that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, that was cool. And there's some elements I noticed too that I wonder if they're influenced from like classical mythology kind of things. The whole thing with Mayana being the mother of that abomination, it's almost like Grendel's mother, in Beowulf, similar. And then there's some direct similarities to like some Arthurian myths. He says that he rides 2 horses to death on the way, which is a lyric in the song that you wrote. And that in the old Arthurian myths, Lancelot rides 2 horses to death to save Guinevere. It's like a similar concept. Then you also have this like test of the hero, this trial thing that again is often portrayed in those Arthurian Grail myths, which in this he has to sit on the throne, and it's this test of fire like thing. That's another thing. There's seems to be a lot of elemental references. He's talking, you got the fire thing going on, the water, and even in his descriptions, he'll describe, blades slicing through the air. Or when he's hitting the ground, it'll say like, it'll describe him hitting the dirt. So like elements seem to be another thing that he's referencing a lot. Just unique aspects that I noticed because I haven't read Henry Kuttner in a long while. The first one I ever read was The Citadel of Darkness, one of his Prince Raynor stories, and I really liked it. It was one of the first sword and sorcery tales I read, and I read the Elak stuff, but it's been a long time, and we've been reading all this Howard. And to me, this is, even though it's in the same genre, it's distinctly different. So those are some things I picked up on.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read those Prince Raynor stories in forever, and that was something, referring to my recent conversation with Michael Moorcock, I meant to ask him and never got around to it, was how much of an influence were those Prince Raynor stories on his Eternal Champion, particularly I think they were in the Elric stories. They might have been in Corum too. Do you remember Prince Raynor?
Gaynor?
Was it Gaynor?
Yeah, there's a Gaynor.
Okay. I was thinking there was a Raynor, but it's been forever since I've read those.
There might have been, but I think there's a Gaynor who's he's a reoccurring character that aids the different aspects of the Eternal Champion. He's in Corum. He's in Corum quite a bit, and he's in Elric. And then there's he's connected, I think, to this warrior of jet and gold, which is another character. But again, I think that goes back to that Arthurian stuff. It's that particular character you mentioned is also similar in having this kind of mysterious knightly thing going on. But it's a good point though. I hadn't thought about that. I like those Raynor stories, and it might just be nostalgia because they were one of the first ones I read. I remember reading that Pyramid Books collection, that Sword and Sorcery, Elsbrog de Camp anthology, and that one was in there. And I remember reading, there's some other great ones in there too, but there's some really dense stuff in there. There's Clark Ashton Smith's Testament of Athamas, which is real wild. The one Far from the Grey Mouser story is when the Sea King's away, where they go underwater, and it's all this description of what's happening down there. And then Hellsguard is in there, which we talked about. So I think the Prince Raynor story being wedged between those was almost like this lighthearted kind of relief, because it's just like an action-packed adventure tale amongst all that weird stuff. So it might have stuck out to me because of that. And since then, I've always been fond of those stories. And I didn't read Elak until later on. But the Raynor stories are pretty cool.
I think I may have read those Raynor stories before I read the Elak stories. Now, at one time, you could not find, let me back up. The Raynor stories I read in one of the Echoes of Valor anthologies that was edited by Carl Edward Wagner. And those were in there, but the Elak stories weren't in there. And it was hard to find those Elak stories, collect them all, because I think I read 2 or maybe even 3 of those, but I couldn't get the final story until I managed to get the Griffin pressing of it, which is a very, very amateurish pressing. And I looked around for the book. I was going to hold it up here. I'll try to put an image on the screen if I can find one. It's so rare, I may not even be able to find an image on the internet for the final video. But this, I don't know how much this goes for now. I found it in a used bookstore, but I originally read those in that Griffin pressing. But this is the Planet Stories one, and this will be the one to get, because that Griffin pressing of Elak of Atlantis is all jacked up. Do you have it?
No, I have the one you just showed. I think some of the Elak stories are in, so that anthology I just mentioned, the old 1950s Pyramid, there was 4 of them. I think one of them was called, the first one was Swords and Sorcery. Then there was The Spell of 7. Mm-hmm. Then there's called The Fantastic Swordsman. And then there's another one that is kind of, I think it's in the same series. It's called Wizards and Warlocks. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think there's 2 or 3 Elak tales amongst those different anthologies. I'll have to go back and check. I know Prince Raynor's in there.
Yeah, like I said, there were 4 Elak stories, and 3 of those you could get in anthologies if you scrambled around. This was the early days of the internet too, but if you scrambled around, you could get the 2 or 3 whatever that were printed in anthologies, but you could not get all 4 of them. There was a 4th one you could not get unless you got that Griffin pressing back in the day. Unfortunately, the folks at Planet Stories did reissue this, the book I was just showing there, Elak of Atlantis. But now in both of those collections, all 6 of Kuttner's Sword and Sorcery stories are included in the Griffin pressing and the Planet Stories pressing. You get the Elak stories and the 2 Prince Rainer stories.
Yeah, that's the same one I have too, and yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and as far as these stories, nothing to me will ever touch Robert E. Howard's Sword and Sorcery. That's just me. And but I think these Elak stories are really good. I mean, I was impressed enough to write a song about the story Dragon Moon, which was the Cauldron Born song, Dragon Throne. I think I already mentioned that. But I was talking, I think it was John Maddox Roberts. I was talking to him years ago. Wrote a lot of the Conan pastiche novels and King of the Wood and some other good writer. But he made the comment something about he thought the Elak stories were better than the Conan, but Howard's stories, and I was like, I don't think so. But I guess different people have different opinions. But anyway, can you think of anything else that we should cover regarding Dragon Moon today?
One other comment I had thought to mention is that another thing I've read, some speculation about it, is that the title Dragon Moon was a typo in Weird Tales. Because if you think about it, there's no connection. If it had been called Dragon Throne, like the song, that would have made more sense. And yeah, I read a thing where someone was speculating that it wasn't even meant to be called Dragon Moon. I don't think we'll ever know that, but yeah, I wonder.
Maybe Farnsworth Wright changed the name. I think maybe he did that sometimes. For what reason? I see no good reason. It probably should have been called Dragon Throne, right? I mean,
yeah.
Well, I guess that's it. We can't talk a whole lot more about it without giving away that great punch at the end.
Yeah. Hey, we did good this time by not doing that.
Yeah. It's a first for me anyway. Well, with that being said, this has been Matthew Knight and Howie Bentley for Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Be sure to catch us on the next episode.
Behold the dragon!